Well, good afternoon, Natasha. It's wonderful to see you. Welcome to Conversations About Money. I am so excited to have you here as my guest today for a couple of reasons. Number one, you're one of my favorite coaches. And when we spoke recently, I was just so amazed at everything that you've been doing there in Australia. And I just really wanted to have you on the show and just talk about your journey and everything that you've gone through since we first met, which I think you said it was 2018 probably that we first met when I went to Australia and we did a training there in person. Let's just start with maybe you telling us a little bit about your journey since then, because you were a financial advisor and also had a mortgage company, and then you did the training. And tell us what's happened since then.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so excited to be on your podcast. Oh gosh, it has been such a journey. So, as you said, when we met, I was running or trying to grow a holistic finance practice. So, my background is as a qualified accountant, and I then became a qualified financial planner and a mortgage broker with a view of offering like a one-stop shop. And what I noticed was that people were still very much stuck in their financial reality of whatever it was. So no matter how much, and I did courses, I wrote a book, I was of the belief that if people knew more, then they would change their behaviors and fully went in down that path and realized that no matter how great the advice, no matter how much knowledge people had, they still were just stuck where they were, right? They just weren't either taking that positive action or they were actively self-sabotaging. And so that really grew my interest in going, okay, what is it that's underpinning this? How do we actually get people to shift their behavior? And that put me on a hunt to try and broaden my skill set and find something that taught me more around people's behavior around money. And there was just nothing in Australia at all. And that was when I actually had met you. Um, and so, since becoming a certified money coach, my business has completely transformed. First of all, I think, struggling to grow it because I was offering too many different things, and I was in that process also confusing people about what I was and what I did. And so, once I went all in on, look, this is just what I do, I don't give financial advice, I'm a certified money coach, this is how we work. I mean, it's like the floodgates open. Like suddenly, the business was growing with ease, and I just felt a lot more fulfilled and aligned with what I was doing. And I was seeing the changes in my clients, which was, the thing that I guess at the end of the day is, why we do this work and sort of what fulfills you and lights you up to get up and do it all over again. So yeah, I've done a complete about face, since we met and since I went through your training.
Wow. Well, I was so surprised because I knew you already had a very successful practice. So when you said that you had completely left that side of the business, and so you sold your business, I take it.
Yes, so I sold the various components and just went, you know what, I'm all in. Now all I do is I'm a certified money coach, and that's the only service that I provide.
Was the turning point for you when you just knew that this was your work to do in the world? What was it?
Look, I think it was building for a long time because even when I was an accountant, I was trying to solve a problem. So I was going about in all these different ways, just trying to ease people's financial stress, trying to get them to be more engaged with their finances. And so I was trying all these different things, and none of it was working. So once I met you, once I went through the training and started applying that approach to the work I was doing with my clients, I started to notice the shift. And I think that really then was the turning point where I went, I finally found what I've been looking for. This is where
Mhm.
I've been meant to be.
Well, our stories are really common. Uh, I mean, are very similar rather, and not uncommon in terms of people who become money coaches who were financial professionals. Often, especially women, former financial professionals, I find um, really want and need to see their clients making progress not just like, oh, more money under management or more financial planning, but literally, how is this changing your life? Are you able to move forward? Are you able to achieve some of the goals that you set out for rather than stay stuck and or sabotage, as you said? And I'm just curious for you, what were some of the things that you started to notice first with your own clients?
Well, I think the common thread that I've been noticing as the years have gone on is, first of all, how many of my clients have been in therapy and have been seeking some type of counseling and support. Um, and what's also interesting is that the counseling that they were seeking never really addressed the financial aspects of things. And so what they've been finding is that the work of working with a money coach has actually shifted things for them and given them um, not just the pathway to healing, but just also, okay, well, now that we understand what's been going on, what do we want to do with this information? So, therapists might call it therapy for growth, but really it's then going, okay, let's go beyond just that emotional state and get practical into how do we now shift these behaviors moving forward. So, yeah, so that's something that I've noticed, and I've just noticed again just how common just childhood, I would almost say pain, really, like just
Yeah.
childhood wounds. Some have experienced trauma, some have experienced adverse childhood experiences. But the common thread is that pretty much everyone has faced a challenge of some description in their
Mhm.
youth. And really, then as a certified money coach, what I do is support them in many ways to understand and have that bird's eye view of what has this really been about, where have these behaviors come from, and what's the story that they developed from it. Because so often the story that they've created is, not doing, I guess, is not being fair to them and their own strength and resilience, So it's about then, creating that, severing that connection between that sort of false belief system and going, but this is actually who you are and what you've been capable of. And some of these things have been, as you and I will discuss, learned behaviors, and they're not ingrained in your DNA. So you can absolutely shift them. You were just reacting to the situation in the best way that you knew how, based on the behaviors that were being modeled. So yeah, so that's really just grown my interest even more into just how, I guess, how widespread various types of trauma and childhood wounds are, and just the extent to which really all those experiences I've found they affect two things for people, which is that sense of safety and security and that sense of self-worth. And when you think about it, money is then the thing that we use to try and soothe that, solve that problem, use it as the measure. But really, it's come from these wounds that haven't been healed and haven't been addressed. And we've sort of developed these maladaptive coping mechanisms. So,
Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, I recognize too, how, we talk about, we're not therapists, but this is a therapeutically informed coaching model because we have to look at the past in order to understand how a person got to where they are and why they think, feel, and behave the way they do around money is often, as you know, not rational or logical and based upon whatever the history and experiences, childhood is the most impactful. And what I find really amazing about people is that, we develop these compensation systems. You know, this happened, whatever, could be trauma with a big T, trauma with a little t. Doesn't even have to be trauma. It could just be the child had an experience that felt painful and caused them to think something was wrong with themselves and or that somehow they were not enough and or they could not get it right. And then they develop these compensation systems, which mean, one of them is let's just avoid the subject altogether, which is what the innocent archetype does, right? Because it's not safe. And for many people, what's fascinating, I don't know how much you see this, but I see it a lot, where it can actually even not feel safe to have much money. The
Mm.
more money I have, the more fearful and or unsafe I feel is something that I see a lot of. Is that something that you've experienced with your clients as well there in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're often surprised because when people come to me and they say, "Look, I'm just struggling to hold on to money, if and I'm just treading water," and we'll have the conversation around, well, it's serving a purpose. Whatever direction and purpose you give it, it's going to serve that purpose. Now, what do you think happens if to you it's not safe to have money? So it's
Mhm.
the same as, holding a snake in your hand. Your body's going to have the visceral response of going, this
Right.
thing is dangerous. I'm going to get rid of it as quick as I
Yeah.
can.
Let's
And
just spend it.
often, yeah, so often giving them that understanding, at first it sort of catches people by surprise to go, what do you mean money doesn't feel safe? And then when we go through their past experiences and we say, okay, well, let's go through what might have been events that have taken place and things that have happened that might make it feel unsafe for you to have money. So it
Mhm.
might be then that, any time we've had money, there has been something bad that's happened. Maybe we were robbed. Maybe people took advantage of mum and dad, and so therefore it's not safe to have money. I've had clients who have had wealthy relatives that were always, I guess, spoken about in a negative way. So I'm like, well, then in that case, as much as you strive for wealth, to you, to some extent, it's not safe to have wealth because you're worried you're going to lose these connections because you're going to be put in that same basket as those people. So there's various ways that it can be not safe to have money, but it is a very common thread. And I notice there's a lot of release of guilt or shame from people once they realize that that's. I'm like, well, it's been serving that purpose. You have been doing what you're wired to do, which is to protect yourself.
That's
So
right.
we want to now make it feel safe to have money and make that a comfortable experience. And the other thing as well is that often people don't realize is that I suppose even when we have unpleasant experiences, I've grown up, in war zones, for example, and we might say, well, that is unpleasant. Why would I want to replicate that? But that sense of uncertainty is familiar. And as you know, we're wired to go towards what is familiar as well. So again, if there was that pattern of behavior of there never being any money and that sort of stress and adrenaline around money as well, that can be, again, a way of us perpetuating that behavior because we're going towards the known and the comfortable. So having money, not having to stress about money, that's actually unsafe. It's unfamiliar territory. I don't know what to do. So again, I'm going to, go and repeat the patterns that mean that I'm not going to have money and I'm just going to tread water because that's what I know. So yeah.
Right. But it's so fascinating because it's not like there was a conscious decision to do that. It's completely subconsciously driven. And when the person realizes that they've been doing it subconsciously and recognizes that that really is the operating system and it was designed to keep them safe, but it actually is the opposite in reality. Meaning, if you're going to avoid money, not save, spend everything, you're actually creating the conditions for the worst possible scenario. So it's not rational or logical. And when they get that, it's like, oh my God, that moment of realization is a big one, you know. And I've actually had coaches who are in training who've had that very same dynamic and recognized it and were able to overcome some of their dynamics as well, which of course just made them even better coaches because they had similar experiences of, whatever that pattern was, they too needed to overcome it. And I mean, as you know, we're all human and we all have patterns and we all do have to do our own work. Doesn't matter who you are, everybody's got something, right? So for you, I'm remembering you probably didn't even know what you're getting into because I remembered sort of the deer in the headlights look when you came to do the training, remember? And so I'm just curious from your own perspective, how did going through the money coaching process impact you that might be helpful for people to understand that you don't have to be like money coaches aren't perfect. we're not required to be perfect with money because the truth is we are all a work in progress. We all have subconsciously driven patterns. We can't, it's not like you can just open it up here and look underneath the hood and say, oh yeah, you have that pattern or that going on. You have to go through the process in order to sort of excavate and find out what's really going on. And so every coach does that for themselves. What was something that you recognized for yourself?
Yeah, I think I remember you saying when we were going through my bio, you said from a young age you were the banker. Right?
Mhm.
And I
I do
remember
recall
that
that.
moment. But and again, and see, and that was my coping mechanism. So I will often say when I'm, delivering a workshop, one of the first things that I say is, hi, I'm Tash, I'm a certified money coach, and I suffer from financial anxiety, right? And that already just makes people feel so much more at ease to go, oh my gosh, so you have your issues too, right?
Yeah,
And it's like, yeah, look, absolutely. Like we all do. And it's then understanding where has all of that come from. So for me, coming from, everywhere that I lived, it was a war zone. There was a lot of financial uncertainty, and I was a little bit, I guess trying to be the protector as well of my parents and my family, even though I was the kid, right? So
mhm,
becoming the banker was my coping mechanism of going, okay, well, if I know where everything is and how it works, then maybe I can go and do things. And so what I learned through the experience is because when I then fled the war and I came to Australia and I thought, everything would tell you that, okay, well, if I'm no longer in that space and if now I have, I have money and I have a good income, then that anxiety should go away. And that's sort of how much it then tells us of how much of these learned behaviors will stay with us. And I have clients who say, once I have a certain amount in the bank, I'll no longer feel anxious or worried about money. And I said to them, unless you address that root cause of the anxiety and shift that behavior pattern, that anxiety will stay there. You're just going to transfer it. You're going to be now worried now that you have the money. What happens if something happens to the money? What if I lose it? What if
right.
this happens? What if it gets hacked? And none of that is actually around that sense of safety has to come from within and from us learning and unlearning a lot of those behaviors. Now, for many people, I notice that they have a state of powerlessness around change or around money. And again, once they realize, look, that has come from those feelings from when we were kids because we were literally powerless at that age. The grown-ups were the ones in charge. They were the ones doing things. So we consciously have to teach ourselves that, you know what, I'm no longer that kid anymore. There are now things within my control that I can do, that I can shift. And so that is something, for example, with my anxiety that I had to consciously work on to remind myself that I am now safe. Each time a bill comes in, I don't have to go into a heightened state. Yes, okay, there's money there for it. Yes, there's this. Yes, there's that. Yes, there are things that we can do to generate more money, right? So we don't have to worry about touching the emergency expenses and all of that. So yeah, it's been an ongoing journey, and I'm glad to have that experience because I can connect with my clients better as well and go, you know what? I've been there. And for me, it's still a work in progress. It now just takes less effort. It's easier for me to notice when I've gone into when I've switched into that mode and I can do, a bit of a reality check and go, look, is it actually that bad? Like, do I have to
Calm
react
the anxiety
differently?
down when you
Yeah.
notice it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think especially fear and anxiety, I often tell coaches when I'm training, the first thing you have to do when somebody has high fear and anxiety states is to teach them how to calm it down. And, we use polyvagal breathing and different kinds of techniques to help calm that down because when you're in that state, you're in your instinctive brain, you're not in your thinking brain, and therefore whatever decisions you might make at that time are going to potentially be flawed because that's not the part of your brain to be making a decision from, especially around money, right? So I'm curious for you because I know in my own practice, the vast majority of my clients actually have a fair amount of money, and their money issues, similar to yours or mine, aren't necessarily about not having money or not being able to make money, save or invest money. It's more the behavioral and emotional stuff. In fact, I would say 70% of all my clients have emotional behavioral dynamics and they're doing fine at the practical level. Is that true for you as well?
Look, there's a combination. What I see typically, a lot of women as well coming to me for is if they're at a state of having to make a certain financial decision, there's a
Mhm.
lot of that self-doubt. There's, the fear that the old money habits will creep up. So often that's an aspect to it. I see a lot of people who have goals but are just struggling to get out of that, treading water kind of
Mhm.
state. So it's usually around that. But what we find is when they come in, what they're looking to shift is, I know I don't want to have to worry about this anymore, or I want to be confident in what I'm doing and to move forward. And surprising things will emerge from that. There might be things around career changes and things that weren't per
Mhm.
se um, on the radar for them when they came to see me. But when we go through, okay, setting meaningful goals and doing things with intention and with purpose, often that'll be one of the things that come about. But again, then those fears come through of, oh, but what if it's less money? Or what if I do, like, I can't just break away from the things that I
Right.
know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see sometimes how much the intersection of work and money shows up in our body of work. So, as you just said, how especially people who really feel like they would love to be able to leave a particular job that has lost its usefulness. There's no juice there. They're just going to work every day, but they're miserable, right? And so when they look at, oh, I can't possibly quit my job or change jobs or whatever, do what I really want to do because of the money.
Mm,
And I often work with people who are at that intersection of trying to see, can I make a career change or not? Or, you know, maybe start a business that they've always hoped they'd be able to do, but the money stuff keeps coming up. So, and then in that case, it's looking at, you know, not being able to make those changes if there's enough money can't be about money, meaning it's a symptom, it's not the real problem, right? So the real problem can be any number of things. It can be that a person doesn't really feel that they're they're worthy
mm,
somehow of being able to make that kind of change because they don't have a container of self-value. So
mm,
they'll just stay in this job because they feel like they're not worth it. And I
mm,
just have to pay the bills and or the deep fear of failure. I've got one client I'm working with right now who he talks about constantly, I really want to make this change. I know I have enough money, but if I fail, then what will people think of me?
mm,
Right?
mm,
So all of these then become symptoms and or projections that keep people stuck, but there's a money component to almost all of it, right? Have you seen similar things around people relative to work, meaning, purpose, trying to find something that fits them, but being terrified of making that change?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting then, in your work, obviously, we talk a lot about archetypes. It's interesting then seeing those archetypes, how they really emerge when we're making those sorts of decisions and conversations. Whether it's the tyrant of going, well, you know, but this particular path, it doesn't have that status, or it might not have, that level of money associated with it. I'm working with a client at the moment who's very much stuck in the martyr pattern of going, well, I have been the breadwinner and it's my role to sort of provide and do everything for everyone. But again, that resentment and the victim archetype is coming out of going, well, why am I the one having to do everything and no one ever helps me? And so it's really then breaking them out of those cycles of behavior. And what I like to do with them is start off small as far as going, well, for example, in the case of the martyr, let's get used to receiving, let's get used to doing something that brings you joy on a day to day. So let's start off small, just a little bit of time for yourself. Because if you can't cope with even giving yourself half an hour space to do something that brings you joy, it's very going to be very challenging to get you to shift careers and do really the big thing. they'll bring you joy. So we got to get used to shifting that behavior. But what's interesting is I think people are often surprised with how quickly these shifts can
Mhm.
happen because the biggest thing after they go through that core process and they're aware of their patterns and they're aware of the archetypes is the first thing I'll hear in the next session is, I heard myself talking the other day. I could hear the voice of the victim, coming out and saying, and I'm like, well, there you go. That's already there. You're starting to notice this is the behavior pattern. And I'm like, well, that's the stepping stone to being that circuit breaker. I'm like, now, the more often that you notice, even if you didn't correct or change the behavior in the moment, you're noticing it. Now you'll start to notice it more and more often and over time. And really, they can create change in a very, short space of time once they have that level of awareness and if they're willing to follow through with the small daily exercises that we give them, the small but significant steps to change, right? Where we go, well, if you follow through with that, that then you see the result in the output. So yeah, I've had a few that really were like, oh, I'd love to do this, but that's impossible. That can never happen. And within months, they have changed careers or started the business or whatever it is, and it's going well.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting too, because when you talk about the archetypes, I know that initially, in some countries, when I've gone in to train, right, people will look at the 8 money types and they'll go, "Oh my God, I can never talk to my client and tell them they're a fool." And I say, you're never going to tell them you are a fool. That's not because we're not talking about their personality. We're talking about behaviors, and they're not a fool, but sometimes their behaviors can reflect the fool or whatever archetypes. And the truth is, we all have all of these money types inside of us. It's really just a question of, who has the most speaking parts, who's driving the car at this point, right? And I mean, have you found that too? Because I know that many financial service professionals are just going, oh my God, I don't know if I can use these archetypes. But I don't know about you. I've never had a client be offended by it, ever.
No, it's all in the positioning. So, I always say, particularly with the fool archetype, just because of the name of it, so, that it's foolish, it's playful, it's the court jester, it's and really the fool is just that impulsiveness in us where we often will act before we think, but also it's really I found that the fool emerges when there's an emotion that's just too overwhelming. And I just can't, I want to make this feeling go away. So I find that the fool is present usually as well with another archetype. It might not be active, but I'm like, it will raise its head when that emotion has become too much. And then it's like, I want a shortcut to get rid of it. And that's where the nature of the shortcut will then be whatever we learned growing up. Is it to escape? I've had clients whose parents moved house a lot and then they realize, well, actually, that was mum and dad's way of, trying to solve the problem, quote unquote,
Yeah.
which is really, well, if we escape this house and the problems will go away, we'll go and move, we'll get another house. And it's like, but the pattern of behavior is just to escape it. And the kids will then learn maybe they're not buying and selling houses and moving constantly, but they might then book a trip to get away, right? And it's
Yeah.
like, but the problem becomes you can't outrun yourself.
Yeah. That's funny you should say that because I had a couple that I was working with earlier this year, and they're Italian, and the wife grew up in a family where money was a subject that caused her a lot of pain from the time that she was a small girl. And one of the things that would happen is that she was an only child, and she had her mother, her uncle, and her grandfather and grandmother, and the adults would sit at the dinner table and fight about money every day. It was constantly a fight. There was a family business, and this child would then be sent to her room so that she couldn't overhear, but she would listen anyway, right? And in her mind, the other thing that was going on, not only was money a constant subject of argument and disharmony, but it also took her mother away because her mother had to work really, really hard for a very tyrannical father, her grandfather, who owned the primary business that they all worked in. So grandfather was a bit of a tyrant. mother was sort of an innocent martyr and had to do whatever he said because she lived under his roof and he also employed her. And the two siblings, the brother and uncle and mother fought all the time as well. So there were all these family dynamics associated with the business, which, by the way, that's why the business and money coaching stuff goes so well together, because when you see those dynamics together, it's pretty profound. But in this case, um, she also felt abandoned by the mother because her mother was working all the time. And, children don't understand that parents have to work. They just don't know why, like other children, maybe their mother's not at home all the time. But I mean, I know I was a working mom. My daughter was an only child, and she probably has, I know, issues related to mom worked so hard and wasn't always available, right? That's one of the challenges of being a working mother, is that you can't be everywhere and you aren't an octopus, you're just going to have to, some things have to wait, right? Needless to say, I'm coaching her, and one of the things in her history was the only time she ever remembers feeling happy and safe was when she and her mother went away alone on vacation,
Mm.
right? And she has these vivid, vivid, happy memories of being away with her mother. And one of the things that her husband complains about all the time is that all they ever do is spend money on these big trips, and they take several big trips every year. Now, my client did not make the connection between these things. So
Mm.
I'm coaching her one day, and her husband's there, and I said, so I know that this is part of how, you learn to adapt and feel safe in the world was by taking these little trips with your mom, and that would give you all kinds of positive experience that you would then hold on to. And I'm curious if you noticed what you tend to spend most of your money on.
Mm.
And she sat there for a moment and she said, well, I don't really spend any money. She's got a big martyr archetype, so she hardly ever buys anything for herself. I
Mm.
said, okay, but when you think about your family budget and where does the majority of your money go that's not for sort of your hard fixed expenses, right? The extra money, where does that go? She sat there and all of a sudden she went, oh my God. And I said, what? What are you thinking right now? And she goes, I have never seen this before. I, all of the money, I don't spend any money on myself. I will buy things for the kids. I'll buy things for my husband. The only thing I ever spend money on, but I don't even think it's for me, I think it's for my family, is our trips. And I said, yeah, do you know why you're doing that? And she started to cry. She just started to sob.
Yeah.
And she said, well, I think I'm beginning to. And I said, well, how do you feel now that you're making this connection that you're just recreating your childhood
Mm.
and you're trying to give your children the experience that you had, which made you feel connected to your mother? My
Mm.
question to you is, do you feel like you have to do this to compensate for something that they're not getting? And then she really started to cry and she said, yes, I'm very conflicted because I said I would not be a working mother, and I am. And now I
Mm.
feel guilty and ashamed. And so I overspend on travel and we're constantly taking trips. And I said, so I think what you have is a really deep compensation pattern, but it's important that you know that it didn't come from no place.
Mm.
That's how you connected with your mother. It's the only connection you ever felt like you had. Now you've recreated that same pattern with your children. The problem is it's causing financial hardship because you're overspending in this area. And I think we need to talk about what you could do instead. And we need
Mm.
to help you work through some of the guilt and shame you have because you're a working mother. And this is where you get to forgive your own mother too. because your mother was doing what she had to do. And she was under the thumb of your grandfather. It wasn't like she felt she had a choice. And you too have to work and didn't have a choice. So maybe it's time just to forgive this. Maybe it's
Mm.
time to not be so hard on yourself and to also forgive your own mother. So it was this really powerful thing that she had never made the connection. So that's the other thing is people will write their whole, historical perspective in their money biographies, but they still don't make those connections until somebody helps them to point out what those patterns of compensation, et cetera, are that were created as a result of those experiences, right?
Oh, absolutely. And the money bio is such a powerful and important component of that process, because without that information, without that context, we really can't, notice and draw upon those patterns and the emotions. I find a lot of people, we have to sit down and I pre-warn them and I say, I'm just going to prompt you as we go because I want you to notice what is the emotion that's attached to that memory because they'll often write information, but they won't write down how they felt. So there's
Mm-hmm.
also that aspect of teaching, even though we're teaching adults now, but it's like most of us haven't been taught. We've been taught there's no time for this, suppress the feelings. And so a lot of people, and I say, well, if money is so emotionally driven, and if we haven't been taught how to connect with our bodies and what we actually feel, then
Mm-hmm.
how can you hope to be, the driver of the car, to be in charge of your finances and not have them control you? Because we just lack that awareness. So often there's homework for my clients as far as just getting to notice what is it that I'm feeling each day. Now, for some people, it's easier than for others. Some really struggle with it. And we say, look, that's okay. Again, none of us were taught. So we
Right.
then go, okay, well, let's pick the five core emotions and just use a scale and just get practice at noticing on a scale how happy, sad, angry am I feeling? And then we build on from there. But yeah, it's absolutely crucial. And this is sort of why, I've had people ask me, would I do a self-paced online program for money, for the money coaching process? And the reason that I've resisted is exactly what you said there, is that, someone can go through and write their own bio, but they'll still be reading it through their own filter, right? And
Right.
so unless there's someone there to go and challenge them or to observe something that they haven't noticed before, I'm not sure that they'll be able to gain as much from it because it's like, well, I'm just, I'm repeating the story that I have anyway, and I'll continue,
Right.
saying that to myself. I'm like, there needs to be a facilitator there to support you and go, well, hang on, is that really the case? Or if this was a story about Oprah, how would you look at that same event, for argument's sake? Interesting
Mm-hmm.
how much the perspective shifts. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah, and I think it's sort of like the little sign on the car mirror that says objects may appear to be closer than they are, and we just have these blind spots. We can't see this stuff for ourselves, even if we're right on top of it, because of the subconscious nature of this and trying to connect those dots, unless you know what you're looking for, can be difficult for people. Um, so yeah, it's great.
absolutely.
I'm so glad that I mean, I can hear you, Natasha. I can hear the way that you have integrated this work so beautifully. I'm really thrilled about that. Um, so, when you think about, you have a lot of wisdom to impart on so many different levels. I mean, you just do, and I know that about you. What is something that you would love to have your audience and people in general know about money, and especially the behavioral side of money? Would you wish that everybody would know so that they could understand more and get the help and support they need?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think it's probably the same thing that I think I wish I knew as well, is that it's not about how much you earn, it's not about the facts, it's less about that money IQ. It really is the real shift comes in really understanding yourself and healing some of those wounds, building on that self-confidence. We said it at the start. It's that sense of safety and security and that sense of self-worth. And until we start to address those two core needs, then it doesn't matter how much we earn or where we are. You know, I've lived it myself. I've changed my environment completely. But until those two components were healed within myself, the challenge remained the same. It didn't matter how much I earned or what I did. So, yeah, I think really that would be the thing that I think if more people understood and said, look, you know, we really, once you invest the time to address that part and to challenge some of those stories that you've been carrying all this time and let some of that go, that's sort of where true freedom lies.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that, you know, Einstein's E equals MC squared is E equals money coaching squared gives us also incredible capacity to actually learn and change and grow in ways that people really don't fully understand until they experience it. And and it's also a hard thing to communicate to others because our work is so nuanced and there's not like an easy way of explaining what it is. How do you describe money coaching to your clients when they call?
That's a really good question. Look, I think we just sort of get caught up in the conversation of sort of what they're struggling with, and usually it's just through that phone call and just sort of reflecting back things to them that they themselves just start to realize, oh, it's my psychology. It's this has been the thing, or actually, yeah, you know, my parents used to do the same thing. Yes, you know, there I am now. So it's through that conversation that we sort of go, okay, well, this is really what needs to shift. This is sort of what your needs are. So how would you feel if that was then addressed? And we just sort of go through that because I do, as you say, I do struggle when I, you know, if I'm networking with colleagues and I say, you know, so I'm a money coach and they go, so what do you do? And it's like, well, what do I do? I make people feel a lot better about themselves and about their financial reality, and I make them feel support them to get to a space of like confidence and control.
Mhm.
So, but it's a hard one. And the second we start to sort of talk about feelings or emotions, a lot of people go, that's not my space.
Yep.
And I find
Yep.
particularly financial advisors, they go, that is not my space. If someone brings up emotion, I'm going to tell them to call Tash. It's not mine.
Yeah.
And to me, I find that so interesting because at the heart of it all, it is about us honoring our feelings and it is about love and connection at the end of the day. All of those compensation methods, everything is about everyone seeking that love, connection, acceptance, right? But we're going about it in this completely disconnected sort of fashion. So,
Well, it's hard for people to feel like they can truly love and appreciate themselves if they don't think they're doing well financially because of how the self-worth, net worth thing gets so entrapped. And so few people actually feel that degree of confidence. So no wonder we live in a world where so many people struggle financially, whether it's practically or emotionally and behaviorally, it's because, you know, we don't always feel so good about ourselves. And I don't know, I think money issues and suffering around money is one of the deepest pockets of suffering in all of humanity, in my experience anyway.
no,
Um,
absolutely. And I'll often illustrate to people because they say, you know, money is the way that, you know, we show love, we reward, but also the way we punish. And people look at me and I go, well, let's take in the West, for example, Santa Claus. I mean, what do we tell kids about when Santa Claus will come? And not, you know, if you have been good,
Not if you're
you're
naughty.
worthy of this. Yeah, and if you haven't been worthy of this. I said, now take that to the next level of you trying to start a business or get into the next income bracket. But do you feel that you have been good enough? Are you worthy of this reward or not? What's been happening there? And I also find it interesting when we go back to the money buyer and we look at the person's earliest memories. I've actually noticed that those memories are connected to the person's behavior now. So those
Yeah.
who like to hold on to money or save it or focus around that, their first money memory will often be receiving the money and putting it aside or wherever it might be.
Vain. Yeah,
And for some of the
exactly.
others, it's the first time was when grandma took me to the lolly shop and gave me some money and I can do whatever I want with it. I've just started to notice that pattern sort of emerging as well with, okay, that's how significant that is to us, that the behavior that I'm exhibiting now, that it's tied to that core, that first memory as well. So it's a fascinating field of work. It really, I'm learning things every single day. No two clients have been identical, and it's just been fascinating. I'll just leave you with one more story, if I may, just to again
Please.
illustrate just how nuanced those dynamics are. We spoke earlier about whether it's safe to have money, and I had one client who it was amazing. She has a business, and she was always really great at, I guess, always having money in various respects, but never physically in the bank. And that
Mm,
created that self-doubt in her as to, um, am I good with money? Can I make good financial decisions? And then when we had a look at the bio and we had a look at, some of the family dynamics, what emerged was that her physically not having cash was serving the purpose of maintaining the connection with her father. So her father was the eldest of several kids. The parents had struggled with alcohol abuse, so he became the carer, the protector, the rescuer, right? And so that was his way of being, and he then translated that onto the dynamic with his daughter. So it was then very much that was how. So I'll often ask my clients, how did your parents show love? Like, how did you know that you were loved? Like, did they verbally express it? Did they like what was it? Because in this case, it was that was their dynamic, is that, she would then be in financial strife, he would come to the rescue,
rescue.
that maintain it. And so for her, that point of freedom was realizing that it's not that she's bad with money, it's that it was serving a purpose. And the purpose that that was serving was maintaining that connection with dad. Because if I'm independent, or if, for example, if I even outgrow him, what might that do to that connection
Yeah.
there? So there's just so many, it's never about what you think it is at the surface of it. There's layers to it. And sometimes you're continuing to unpack the longer the conversation goes and notice there's another thing about this.
Yeah, I just had a couple that I worked with over the weekend, and she had she was also an immigrant who left a war-torn country. She was from Ukraine. Her family basically sold everything to get her out of the country, and so the focus was her safety, getting her out of the country, and all the money would go to her in order to do that. And then eventually, hopefully, she would be able to make something of her life elsewhere and then bring them over, blah, blah, blah. Well, that didn't turn out so well. And ultimately, she ended up being homeless for a period of time. And she tells the story of one day realizing she had no money left, and then she got rescued by a man who she married. And then when that relationship didn't work, then she went to another man, just she's a beautiful young woman. So some other man came to, the damsel in distress rescuing. And each time she's really bright and quite capable, but now she's on, like, I think third or fourth now man rescuing her. And this young woman who felt deeply insecure and who had to leave her country, not knowing the language, not having anything, this deep insecurity, as well as guilt and shame around how she had been with money and that her parents gave her everything and then there was nothing left,
Mm.
right? So she had accumulated all this stuff. And in order for her to get any needs met, and or at least in her mind, we call it, I don't know if you remember this term, but I call it compensatory love, is when a person develops a compensation system, which is if you love me, you will give me, and part of that is the rescue dynamic, right? So she recognized in the last session that this was a compensatory love dynamic situation, and that in order for her to become capable in her own right to make money, to have money, to feel like she could actually have her own power and capacity, it required that she forfeit the need to be rescued and disconnect that sense of when someone rescues me, it's a sign of love, because
Mm,
it's not. And
mm,
in actuality, it's really more frequently a sign of control.
mm,
And that's what people don't understand. It might look like love, but at what cost? What's the price of that? And it doesn't mean, for example, that your partner doesn't love you because they're rescuing you. It's just that's really not love in its truest form. The best
mm,
thing we can do for people we love is to help them figure out how to do it for themselves
mm,
and know that that's the best thing for them, whether that's a partner or a daughter or a child or whatever, because if we don't do that, then they're always going to need that. And what's worse, the pattern develops and then they have a hard time disconnecting from it, and they'll be doing it for the rest of their lives otherwise. And that's
mm,
a slippery slope for anybody, right?
mm,
So
mm.
I get what you're saying with your client, and it sounds like there's some of that, compensatory dynamic at play as well.
Yeah.
So you're right. It's never what it appears to be. And that's why I think it's so important for people to understand that whatever any of you who happen to be listening to this, when you think about your own life and you think about what's working or not working relative to money, whatever's not working is probably not completely about what you think it is. That there's usually a root somewhere that is deeper and has another aspect to it that's worth knowing, because that, whatever it is where the sticking point is. And until you pull that root up and go, wow, look at that, we've got a live one here and there's more going on here, right? And the root sometimes has tentacles as well. So it's obviously we share a passion for this, and I'm so pleased that you found the work and that you're doing such a great job out there. What's something that you'd like people to know about you and your work? And please share. I know you're going back to school to actually become, you're getting a degree in, is it financial therapy? Tell me about your next chapter.
Yeah, so I'm currently pursuing a master's in counseling, just because I've discovered that, a large portion of what we do as a certified money coach is, we're holding that space. As you said, it's a trauma-informed coaching approach. And I had found that so many of my clients had experienced, various degrees and types of trauma. So yeah, I'm just going through that process now of adding to the tool belt of having a counseling qualification. But at the end of the day, it's really just been formalizing what I already do,
Mm,
making sure that I'm not doing any harm, and I'm thrilled that everything that I've learned so far has just reinforced that what we're doing is on the right track from that point of view. So yeah, I mean, about me, I think I do have a real keen interest in trauma, in childhood experiences, and how that forms and shapes us. And yeah, so my business is Women with Sense, cents.com.au. I work with women, I work with couples. I've found that I think, again, this is stereotyping, but the extent to which men have been taught that they have to be, bravado, that it's not, none of us were taught how to process emotion, but I think we know that women generally, because we tend to connect with each other more, we tend to be the ones that also tend to seek out counseling. So I found that the men who have gone down the path of pursuing coaching, for example, a lot of them are still very, very guarded. It takes a lot more work to get them to feel safe and to even get to know and acknowledge the emotions and the thoughts and everything that's going on for them. So, but I find that women are typically sort of naturally drawn to this process, hence Women with Sense. And yeah, but I work with people from all over the place, good. The great thing about Zoom and technology and one of the things
Right.
that came out of COVID-19 and it became normalized, that everyone uses Zoom or some type of video coaching platform. And yeah,
Well, I really, really appreciate you and the work you're doing in the world, and I can't wait to see what else you're going to do. Um, so thank you for sharing your story and for everything that you're doing. Please do stay in touch and keep me informed. And so thank you very much. I'll let you go about your day. And thank you, everybody, for listening to Conversations About Money. And we'll be back next week.
fantastic. Thanks so much, Deborah.
Thank you.